There you go.
That was creepy.
That was good.
It's like a Hatchimal, like a.
All right,
Oh,
so
sorry.
Yes, are we starting?
You are good. We are recording and we are on.
All right, so this is July 6th, 2021. It's the Select Board's planning session, workshop style, not a regular meeting. So I just wanted to start by just reviewing sort of where we said, sort of our goals for the session. We sort of agreed it wasn't a regular meeting, right? We're not doing any regular business. It's a chance to have more conversation is what I'm thinking, a chance to talk through some of the things that we've raised but haven't had a chance to really get into. And I basically look at it as a kickoff for the year, that we're trying to create a list of goals. We hope that we as the board, as well as the town administrator, will have over the course of the next 10 months, but we won't be making decisions and we're not setting policy tonight, right? This is just discussion that's going to help us formulate how we're going to get things done for the next year, basically. I want just in terms of some of the specific items that are on the agenda, I'm again not thinking we're going to finish the conversation tonight, but that it's giving us a framework for how we can move forward on those topics. So, and then basically my goal at the end is that we will have a specific list of next steps, because that's what Jim was stressing. Sometimes it falls down on finishing. So, but we'll talk about that more at the end. I did choose this room because we have space, because I'm really big on flip charts for this kind of meeting, and you can't do that upstairs. So thank you for making the Zoom thing happen, and we're giving Stowe TV a night off. So, and then my expectation is that we will be reporting and talking more about this at next week's regular meeting, so that people who are watching or wanted to have a comment will be able to comment as usual at the beginning of the meeting. So, so this is the agenda. I sort of just went through that's the goals for tonight. Is that, oh, I guess I should ask, does that meet with everybody's, that's what we were thinking?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first thing is to talk about the roles of the town administrator and the select board. And I started with the things that we mentioned. This easel is not as tall as I was hoping it would be, so I'm not sure how I'm gonna write this. So I put here, I'll just do one at a time. These are the cool. Yeah, I said I'm going to put it a little lower so I can reach it. Oh, you know what? I need to put it behind it. Maybe I won't do that. Maybe that would be a risky thing to do. I don't want to have the markers going out on the wall. So this is sort of I know we talked about it a little, and I tried to pull it up from the notes we had from the previous meeting and from when Denise and I were planning, and just sort of generally what we know is on our list, but. So let's start, town administrator. What else is on that list that what do you see as, and this isn't about reading from the charter or the bylaws, it's, gut reactions, whatever. Any other things? Can you read my handwriting?
Yeah. And you literally have written down what I had written down on my own notes, so.
I mean, maybe.
As an open door for day-to-day concerns from any citizen.
Yeah, that's good.
Other things?
I approached this slightly differently, but trying to think about your notion that you had in the email about sort of if they were to be amended and kind of thinking about the structure of it. And I think I started with the select board rather than the town administrator, because the way the charter is sort of written tells me that the select board is in charge. And then the town administrator has delegated specific tasks in the charter, and a lot of tasks according to our charter, as I was reading. So I started by saying that if it's not in the town administrator's sort of list of items, then it really is the select board's purview to do. I think it's a pretty exhaustive list for the town administrator, but there's still reservations there. And I think those were also important for me, which was investigations was the one that sort of outside of this list that I had on mine. That's where, sorry.
Is that's
yeah. So like the select board's in charge of all investigations, which I thought was just interesting in trying to rectify that with the specific list of tasks for the town administrator, which may include certain investigations for certain purviews of that, of, something wrong with personnel or something like that, but the charter reserves it. So it's more of a question that I have, which is, you have a department head who, has an issue. Who does the investigation, right? Because to me, that's a really important task of this body, I think, that we've reserved, and I think has been done in the past in a way. And so I started with that. And
Can you just stop at other reactions to that? Because I'm not sure I'm clear on it, but
Is it, I will admit that I am not familiar with that part of the charter, if you have it. Is it investigations, meaning like larger things that happen in town, like PFAS, for example, would be something that the board would have purview over because it is affecting all of the residents. I don't know that I would, and so I guess I want to read that, because I don't know that I would feel comfortable with this board getting involved in personnel matters.
So this is what it says, which and I'm not saying I disagree, but it is really interesting language, and this one really struck me, because I think the rest of it I sort of understood, right, how I was trying to divide day-to-day versus not, but this one seemed to have a gray area for me, and it says the Board of Selectmen may make investigations and may authorize the town administrator to investigate the affairs of the town and the conduct of any town agency, including any claims against the town. That's pretty broad.
That makes sense to me.
right, because it's not, I picked up on the delegates to, is in charge of making sure it happens, essentially.
Yeah.
The first thing you said made me think 5 of us are roaming around town building like Inspector Clouseau.
Right, and that was where I had some.
Right.
But it's a very interesting caveat to a lot of because I thought it was pretty clear in the charter what's supposed to happen with the town administrator and what that list is. But this one really struck me because it seems to be that weird area where we have a carve out that's supposed to come back to us and then we can authorize for the investigation.
Yeah.
But it's also one in open meeting format that for me, I feel like there are certain, when it comes to an open meeting, I like to be very careful on bringing any names or conduct in front of the board. And so this is one where I actually thought this would be a really interesting part for us to really assess of what that appointment means for certain things, just because of the ramification of having that in an open meeting session, which worked for me.
Could I want to go up one level from that. I don't have a problem at all with the fundamental distinction that the charter makes, that the TA is what I would call the chief operating officer, and or CA, chief administrative officer, and we're the chief executive officer. I think I understand that. We're like fiduciaries of any board, meaning we are entitled to rely on what we are told. Our duty is to ask questions, not to actually get into the weeds. The investigation thing makes sense because ultimately the fiduciary, you're sort of investigating her at that point. And the fiduciary has to say, okay, we're going to take charge. We're going to hire outside counsel and do this. So I don't have a problem with I think the charter is okay, and it's in accordance with all this stuff we got at that civility workshop. Recognize that his or her approach is policy making and not administrative or executive. Presumably Holden does not have our exact charter. I think the charter could use more detail and example, because here we are 30 years later, wondering exactly what it means, but I don't have a problem with that basic distinction.
And it is a helpful, simple sort of.
Well, I don't know about say simple,
But the CEO versus COO.
Yeah, and fiduciary, and I know you're familiar with fiduciaries.
Right. The fiduciary go under the self.
So,
Would you add oversight to that?
Oversight, right.
Fiduciary oversight? Is that what-
Yes, a different concept as well, but just like, general oversight of what's the ongoings.
40 minutes up.
Thank you for asking.
Anything else? Either one.
At some point, I think this is almost easy.
Yeah, right. That's why we're not gonna spend that.
Right. And why I was talking about detail, at some point, we need to wrestle with the detail.
Right.
Maybe in our own policy. You know, and I think I said 2 meetings ago, if somebody comes to me and complains about somebody, what exactly do I do with that?
Right.
And we need to deal with that.
Right. Yeah, and I think that when we get into work plan and goals discussion, that's when it really, the rubber hits the road, right?
Are we gonna ask Denise her opinion of this?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Do you want to say anything?
Whatever you say.
Well, I mean, I think, to me, my primary role is to oversee all day-to-day operations. I mean, that's pretty much my basic function.
Yeah,
Um,
we can say that too, obviously.
Right, I mean, but that I would say is my primary
Yeah.
function here. Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I don't know if it's more the work plan goals, but at some point, you know, to Jim's point, talking about the details, I think I need to understand, which we've talked about in the past, that I am meeting with employees on matters I'm either hiring or recommending, but then you all are signing a contract that you weren't involved with, you didn't negotiate. Like, I need to understand, like I said, Bill's signatures on everything. I've looked at agendas, some agendas say grant the authority to the town administrator to sign a contract, some are not. I don't know what should be coming before you all to sign and to discuss versus what I should be signing and discussing on those types of things, on contractual, mostly personnel and employment contracts. I mean, I'm the chief procurement officer, I would sign all the other contracts, but that's something that's still a gray area to me is, you know, the treasurer collector, I'm recommending renewing his contract. My plan was to put it before you on the 13th. But I don't know to what extent then we discuss that. Do I just give you the contract? Do we do like, I mean, with the prior two, with the lieutenants, someone else's contract, I mean, we met in executive session for 5 minutes. I said, here's the contract, you approved it, and we moved on.
Right.
So I need more clarification on that aspect of what's mine versus what's yours.
And there's some of those things, like those appointments that, you know, the snow driver, you know, the plow drivers, and like, why are we involved in this? You know, it just seems nonsense. I'm not even sure why you're involved. It's like, especially for part, I mean, those are just temporary positions, like, doesn't the highway, he has to work in a budget, right? So, but yeah, yes.
To your point, it's actually section 4-2K, and it says to participate in the negotiation of all contracts. That is
The
language.
select board?
No, that is for the
That's-
town administrator, which I would say, one, not participating, but hopefully she's leading those negotiations.
Right.
But then two, you know, as you said, if the approval is not explicit with you, and this is why I started with the where does everything else fall? And if it falls to us, based on how we're perceiving the way the charter is drafted, which generally things are drafted as everything on one and then you carve out for another just to catch everything, generally how we do contract drafting, to make sure if that's the case, then it does mean approval has to come to us, which is something we should obviously wrestle with, and whether there are department heads which are reserved for us to appoint, you know, in the charter versus non-department heads and what that means. It's actually ambiguous, and I think it's a statutory interpretation, which is sort of why I started with that framework of we need to wrestle with where does the catch-all go? Because then I think that helps us understand, at least before this would hopefully be updated, to hopefully clarify some of these points.
When is I always forget, I've asked this question multiple times. When's the last time the charter got reviewed? I mean, it has been reviewed, right?
This one I have is
1991.
Oh, here it is, May 9, 2006
Oh, okay.
was the last revision that was put in.
So can I respond to that? I used to be staff to a board. And I think I basically agree with the catch-all idea, because that's how we used to operate. If you're unsure, take it to the board. But what we couldn't do, and what was bad to do, I should say, was to bring something to the board with no context and not enough information for them to ask those questions I was talking about before. So there always had to be a memo. And that's why I always ask about, well, what are the standards that we're looking at this for? Because that helps me formulate a question. So I like the idea of the catch-all, but it doesn't do me any good if I don't know enough to ask questions. And that's the staff part.
Yeah. let's start on the work plan. So now the question is, which work plan do we want to start on first? It's a little chicken and the egg. Denise and I, when we met and we went over the long list of what you guys brought up, I tried to put some of the things in. This is just Denise and I decided this is where we thought they went. And the stars, the stars are, well, in this case, the 3 out of 4 were things that were mentioned in the meeting, and we thought they were under. I actually got clarification, I think, from Jim, HR, right? Because that was the one who said, well, basically, we don't have to choose hiring. But, so I'll put them both up there, and then we can decide. I don't know how people think, if they like to do one at a time, or they want to go back and forth.
It's nice seeing you.
I think it helps going back and forth because I think, I can't, although I can't see that.
I'm gonna,
Sorry.
you know what, I'm gonna get another piece of paper.
No, it's recorded, so
Joyce will do it, okay. Just occurred to me.
No, I would
You
have done
want me
both.
to clear the corner and you can write.
No, I want to put it up, so that,
I'm just gonna put it double.
just so it was a little shorter than I thought it was gonna be.
I printed off a handful of other select board goals in other towns.
Oh.
Yes, that's one whole packet.
Great.
Jump in the right town.
Thank you.
And then there's one more, send that one down.
So this is the whole packet.
Yes, so that's a whole packet of goals of just other towns and their select boards and what they've done when they're doing their either work plan or goals. Jim, can you give that one to Ellen?
Yep.
You have, it's a whole thing, yeah.
Yep.
So just so that you see sort of what their other communities are looking at as far as their, you know, some are clearly much more in-depth and some are than the other ones, but
I didn't even think about doing values and guiding principles.
We'll get there.
I mean, it would be helpful.
I think one town, it may have been Berlin, just listed like on their website, just 5 bullets and that was it. So, I mean, they can be as, obviously as basic or.
Ooh, I like that idea.
And I also, when Ellen and I met last week, there was another town that had done a similar meeting schedule. And I said I was gonna put one together so that if you wanted to start working in, like specific things to do each year, like a work plan.
Oh, nice.
You could sort of fit in sort of so that would be the fiscal year calendar. And then with the normal meeting stuff that we already have planned,
Mm-hmm.
and then you could filter in other items if you wanted to.
That's interesting just to see the variety.
Yes.
Maybe I propose a way to start. Could we maybe have you summarize what is currently up there, so that way we sort of know what you're meaning by each one of them?
Well, these were just, when we did that, when everybody dumped their ideas, these were the things that, when we just tried, when we tried to figure out where would they go in this agenda. So, Lower Village, website, HR and budget. Clearly, I mean, budget shows up both the big picture as well as annual work plan. HR, I think, as Jim said when he first said it, was like, well, now we're hiring an assistant town administrator, so that's sort of covered, but.
Well, I do think she's gonna have to, like, figure out what that
Oh, yeah,
department
no,
looks
right.
like,
But-
so I
but
think
it's-
that's,
But it's
yeah.
clearly under Denise's responsibility as managing staff. So that was basically,
Can I ask
Yes.
another question? Is this work plan also meant to sort of fulfill the charter requirement of her review in a year? Because
Right.
I'd like to make sure we do that just out of
She has
fairness.
benchmarks, yeah,
So that way
absolutely.
you know kind
Yeah.
of what that standard is.
yeah,
and-
so the plan, I mean, I think what we had talked about, my assumption is that we're doing a sort of a draft tonight. Denise might take it back, have some thoughts on it, bring it back, and we still have until the 1st of September to get it done. So that it'll be in place for her next year, since this year was getting through COVID, and that was her goal.
And she did it.
So, and got through town meeting and passed it.
Well, I would still expect, I think my contract requires an annual review anyway, so
Yes.
there will still be one in September-ish.
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
What that would look like this
Right.
year's. And I just want to say, I do think as far as the work plan, I mean, my feeling is something like Lower Village should be on both.
Okay,
Because I think to help me, I need to understand what the board's vision and desire for Lower Village is.
Okay.
And then I can take that and try and implement and figure out how to implement what you all want to see or change or
Right,
whatever at Lower
right.
Village.
And there's different parts of the task, sort of.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, and along those lines, Denise has to be involved in all of that stuff.
Right, and I think that the idea, like these, okay, so policy review, I think we talked about enough, that doesn't need. You know, Courtney had the really good, interesting thought around the whole clarity on capital spending. Well, some of it is budget related, but some of it's about, does the board want to take a position on how much or how we capital spend? You know, do we want to do debt financing? Do we not? And then there's all the information about it. And that was one of the things when we started talking about the calendars thing. We need to have a joint boards of all the finance related boards to fairly early on in the budget process. So.
Yeah.
But so that's sort of where you could say, yes, that could be in both people's or both work plans, but that's specifically why it's on ours. Define role in police accreditation, that was Zach brought that up, and it's sort of what is our role? I mean, I added in what is our role in police accreditation, because I think that's one of the, for me, that's a question we just need to be clear on. Is it there? Is it also here? I mean, that supervision personnel stuff, I'm not gonna write everything again, but that's, again, this an issue. The coordinate with boards and committees, I don't know, I was having a hard time figuring out how to describe that, but it's basically that we need, you know, how do we wanna change more, get rid of liaisons, replace liaisons with, you know, our coordination with boards and committees, so that's that issue. Reclaim leadership, I use that in quotes, but it seemed like a good word to use, for master plan, climate change and transportation, because again, all things that other people might be part of, but we gotta figure out what our role is, and say a master plan is always driven by the planning department, but our role is to actually create a master plan committee, so what is our role? Climate change came up, I thought that was, you know, another one that we want to start a committee, or which we think is on the board. And then transportation, that was Jim's, I was thinking public safety, and he was thinking, you know, more transportation in terms of shuttle plans. Do we, you know, is there a vision for more transportation offered by the town? And then, yeah, so that's a quick summary of what, that's why those are on there as work plan for us, for the select board, but please, rip it to shreds, add, subtract, whatever, you know, if they're in the wrong place. Other things that are missing? Oh, I wanted to put charter review on here because I hadn't mentioned it before, but I wanted to say it to me.
Yeah.
Talked about it before, but,
I'd say charter and bylaw,
Bylaws,
Yeah.
yeah.
And charter's technically town moderator.
yes.
yes, that was one.
I have a suggestion, and then I have a question. Building committees. I think we need a new way of approaching building committees.
Thank
And
you.
I'm not really prompted in this by any existing building committee. Well, I am, but it's consistent with my experience over the past 10 years. Building committees become sponsors and advocates. They even talk about it as being sponsored and advocate. I'm not so sure that's even right.
Right.
They should be more neutral. The affected department should be the sponsor and the advocate. I would love to explore whether there's a different model for doing building committees. And that leads me to my question, which we can punt on each one of these things. So there's several things that are real policy initiatives: climate change, transportation, lower village, maybe the thing I just talked about, the police accreditation. How does that conversation begin? Does that begin with the five of us spinning out ideas? Or does it begin with us saying, Denise, these are our big priorities for the year. Give us some options on that, which we can then discuss, accept, reject, modify, but just gets the creative juices flowing. I don't know how this starts.
Can I offer a comment?
Mhm.
I think, quite frankly, it's both. I think the five of you need to have a conversation to narrow down some of these topics And then I mean, we talked about climate change. Yes, it's on the July 27th agenda, I think. But like transportation, I think we need
Yeah.
somewhat of a better focus so
One
that I
aspect
can,
of it.
whether it's a policy or whether it's putting together a group of department heads to figure out how to achieve what you're looking for. But I think there needs to be I think this group needs to start it, then I will take it, and then it comes back to the board, is what I would see for a lot of this.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I just thought of one for over here. Traffic stuff, that's there, but it's gonna rear its ugly head eventually.
Can I put traffic / public safety?
Yeah.
When you say traffic.
I mean,
Sure.
there's stuff about, yeah.
Speed bumps and-
it's
Oh,
definitely
right.
traffic, public safety,
Yes.
yes.
Sidewalks.
Townwide speed limit.
Pardon?
You got me totally going. Now I see it in everywhere.
Yeah.
In all these
Yeah.
weird towns,
Yeah.
you'd never think would have a townwide speed limit, and it says 25, like, this friggin' city, what are you talking about? You know, Cambridge has a 25 mile an hour.
Mhm.
Right, and then they can post all
Right.
sorts of areas
All-
that
right.
are not that.
Yeah, so for me, I think, at least for the work plan for me, I feel like it needs to be much more specific.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
You know, like I went through and grabbed a number of other towns and their goals, and you know, some of them can be very, very basic and fit into some of these categories. But you know, I have like attend at least 4 off-hour community events. Once every 3 months, prepare a column or press release for the local media. Start a coffee meetup. We talked about the newsletter. I mean, things like that to increase communication. But it's more specific than just website or
Right.
HR.
Right.
You know, increase resident accessibility could be the category. And then I would do that through the website and outreach and,
Yeah.
you know, complete the an HR handbook, develop an intern program. So I feel like
Oh, that's great.
they're great categories, but in order for the board to then
To evaluate.
evaluate, there needs to be
Right.
specific
Oh, yeah.
measurable goals
Right.
included in that.
Yep.
And that's, I mean, I think tonight, all we can do is get the big buckets and then figure out who's gonna work on some of the specifics. I mean, you have a list, but, you know, I mean, that we, like, you know, traffic, public safety, just some of the things that were just mentioned, like.
So maybe this is on our agendas moving forward. We
Yes.
have like a time period, like a 20-minute time period carved out for,
To talk.
we're gonna talk this through, we're gonna come up with a
And
draft
someone will
policy.
take some work, you know, have an assignment to work on it, whether it's Denise working on it or one of us works on it
Yeah.
and brings it back and then we rip it apart.
Yeah.
It's a very good idea. Steve Duggan tried to do that 10 years ago.
Yeah.
We're gonna-
Always wound up being at 9:30 at night, but it is worth trying to arrive. Definitely worth trying to arrive.
I believe in us. We can do this.
Yeah.
Right.
Can I talk about 2 of the things on the
Yep.
TA's work plan? I reread the bylaws and, you know, why not? It was 4th of July. And I was shocked by 2 of them, which deal with traffic and public safety. The Board of Selectmen, upon written report of the highway superintendent, may, in the interest of public safety, without further authority, establish a speed limit of 25 miles per hour on any roadway. It's actually the Board of Selectmen who's the select
And
board.
That was
That's
recently
And it's in
passed.
the
Yes.
bylaws.
and the Board of Selectmen, upon written report of the highway superintendent, may actually establish 20-mile-per-hour safety zones where it meets certain statutory authority. So I see traffic and public safety up here. This is where it hits some of our core parts
So
here,
there's
because I see
policy.
certain things like this where this just feels very day-to-day to me. This feels like we set a policy for the town, and then the point is that is meant to be enacted by, to me, like the chief of police, working with you, working with
Yeah.
the highway superintendent, like that should be enacted if we say, right, this or that, but this was very specific. And so I wanted to sort of raise that because I think we have some nuance around this traffic, public safety of delegation or of sort of mandating a plan on
Right.
this and like working through what our thoughts are on that plan and to lead you into what our thoughts are, and then have you work with, you know, the great folks that you work with to establish what this may look like, as we are receiving obviously a significant number of requests around safety.
But as we are creating the work plan for the town administrator, that's our authority, is that we create either the big bucket of this and say, Denise, you figure out which pieces, you know,
Mhm.
based on that she can do or whatever.
Right, I think that's why I proposed the Traffic Safety Advisory Committee so that we have a group of department heads doing all the legwork and then presenting to this board to say, this is what we recommend. And then ultimately, you're the deciding factor to decide if we make these changes or not.
Right.
Some of them will have financial implications, and that has to all be vetted out first. But I think that is in the works. It just hasn't really gotten underway yet.
So
I
that's
did-
why I'd like to make that a priority, right?
Yes,
Because then it is
yes.
one where we can try
We
to
can
get
check it off.
try to get to a smart goal, right?
Yeah.
Try to get you to
Right,
your
right.
smart goal. Of
Yeah,
But I
what
think
is
what's the
articulated.
priority?
Well, this is what I want to get to, right? Is that like, one, establishing that committee, right? Like, so to me, it's like starting with that, because although it's been established, right, we still have a resident at large, like trying to recruit people for it, like, all of that stuff. And then to me, it's, have 3 meetings of the committee and come back with
Action
what
items.
you believe are the action items we should be talking about, right? And so that way we have that engagement. Like, that to me is what I see as the
Right.
smart goal out of that traffic and public safety, is this is gonna have to be you go out and help us figure out what the issue is, and then you come back with, this is where we've talked about it and where we see as critical, safety zones, critical complaint zones, or whatever that looks like
And
on
then
a
we can
map.
push that on.
So then we can start to talk about that. And then I think it's about saying, we'd like to invite folks from these zones to come to one of our meetings and say, what is going on here? Like, tell us, like we can start to have that conversation where we're trying to figure out what that looks like. So that's kind of me, what I see that is like, get it going. Let's find a resident. Like, I don't know how, if like prioritizing that and advertising of that position in particular, coming back with, after 3, whatever number of meetings, we can set months, which may be more realistic, of, to return to us with a report where you can tell us what your committee.
So I agree with all of that, and I think what you're basically saying is get started with the detail, the day-to-day direct detail, and then cull from that what policy questions there are, policy questions and recommendations, and bring them to us. And make that 2-step can be a model for just about anything.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
In fact, I think it can be a model for how we interact with the boards, other boards and committees.
Absolutely.
Right.
So like, come to us and tell us what's going on in your lives, little details, and then we look at it and say, it looks like you need a policy about this, or maybe not. I mean, we say,
Yeah.
okay, what we draw from that is some high level thing, and then direct.
Yep.
Right.
Is that like, I want to ask this very genuinely, is that specific enough for you to think like that you can go out and achieve that and come back, right? Like that, like I want to make sure that everything here is achievable, like, and I want to use that filter, because I think I don't want to set something up where we've set a bar that is way too far down the road based on, how quickly things are moving and getting the right people on the committee, which I think is, the most important thing. And I had a second comment about the HR one. This to me is the most important one for this year. Not just dealing with the ongoing, of just sort of ongoing running with the number of employees we have, but we just came off of a very intense period for a lot of folks, and helping and ensuring our staff feels welcomed and, all the things that you're working on, right? And just, to me, I don't know how to measure it. I've been trying to think a lot about how do we get to that SMART goal. And the way that I was thinking was maybe trying to enact a policy where annually we sort of have a report of employees coming from you. So is it, you go out with an anonymous, survey, and you consolidate it and can come with, this is how people are generally feeling in town. So we're like, coming back to us with the ability with a report, right, that puts it in your hands to say, this is the general feeling, this is where we think improvement can be made, and like, this is what my action plan is for the next year, right? And like, you helping us help you help, like, it's kind of this give and take where we're checking the pulse of what is ongoing without getting into the weeds, but it ensures that, or I think we're doing our fiduciary duty of, how are we operating, right? Or maybe there is an issue you would like to raise, right? Where we do talk about a specific department that seems, to have a lot of unhappy employees, and we want to address that. And this is what you're planning on doing. And I think that would be a great interplay, because as the appointing authority of the heads of the departments, I would like to know what this looks like. I'm not, and I haven't ran this all the way down to detail because again, I'm trying to get to that SMART goal for you to come back to us and sort of give us this annual sort of state of the employees in a more general sense. But I think it could be a really important exchange of town administrators, select board, making sure that all the folks that are doing great work for our town are happy or that issues are sort of bubbling up in a way that allows for that oversight. This is what I see it as, is that oversight, but not digging to the detail minutia level.
So Zach, you're sort of getting already into the weeds, and I still want to make sure we get the big buckets on here before we start. I mean, if we have time, we can do both, but I just want to make sure that people are thinking like, is this the only 6 things that we want to dig down on and get SMART goals on? So before you get into too much, I want to make sure that we have, and again, the interplay with our goals, which we have to go through sort of and highlight. I mean, our list is long enough that we should have some conversation about what are the priorities, where do people want.
I do think the master plan should also be on Denise's work plan. If only because there is staffing involved in that.
And so the master plan, though, is not up for 2 more years, I think, according to.
I don't think, so when was the last time it was?
I think it's 2023 is when it's due.
Oh, okay. Well,
Okay, so I thought I read that for the master plan, that it would be a good idea to get the committee in place a couple of years ahead of time.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
But it comes from the planning board. So the
Got it.
planning board has to ask the select board to create the master planning committee. I've talked to Jesse. They're just starting to have those conversations.
Okay.
But yes, it's the planning board that sort of kicks that off.
Okay.
And then has to come back to the select board and ask to put together a committee.
Okay.
So I have a question. It seems to me like these 6 or 7 things that's quite a lot on top of day-to-day duties.
Yes.
It is.
Do we want to generate a list that will be longer than can be accomplished?
No, I just want to make sure that before we start editing it, that everything's up there that people are thinking, like Megan said, the master plan, we can, I mean, and also like website is sort of part of the communication PR, but yes, no, I agree totally.
I agree with you. I think it's just about, but I just don't want, and I'm ashamed of myself for not thinking of it before. We have one ongoing investigation that will probably come to a culmination in the next year, at least I hope so. And it happens to be in an area that Denise is quite an expert in. So something like follow up on IG investigation, I think has to be part of her work plan and maybe ours too.
Okay.
You said IG.
Yeah. IG, yeah.
IG?
Inspector
Inspector
General.
Oh, Inspector General, I'm just like.
Not Instagram.
Okay, and we should have that on ours too. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's just me though. Is everybody
Yeah.
good with
Well,
that?
we're putting, right now, we haven't started,
Okay.
because we already agreed this might be.
Right.
one.
Can I ask you a question? Do you feel like some of those things are tied into your day-to-day? That it's like a day-to-day, like,
Is
how
it
do I
too
ask this?
overlapping?
is it, well, no, not that it's, I mean, does that seem manageable to you with your day-to-day? Like, so HR stuff is going to be stuff that some of that is going to be your day-to-day.
Right, but that's why I think I need to know the specifics of what,
Right,
so that I can then, HR, obviously, it's all day, every
All
day.
day, I
mean,
know,
it's just,
right.
same thing with the budget. I work on the budget 12 months out of the year. So what is
Right.
the expectation of the budget item? Is it
Right.
just to
Just
produce a
produce
balanced
the
budget
budget,
every year?
right.
So I need to understand
Right.
at some point
Mhm.
what the drill down of these
Yes,
are.
right.
Obviously, the last one is pretty easy because that is the bucket
That is-
itself.
Yeah.
But
This is exactly why I was trying to get to a level of granularity, because I see things like Lower Village website. I have no idea what those mean except for what we said at last meeting.
Mhm.
And if there's anything
Right, but-
I come out of this meeting with, it is that I want to know that you have enough instruction to think that you can come back after your review with serious, smart, like where you think you have set, really good achievable goals back to us? Because that's what I perceive as the action item off of this is handed to you, you come back to us, right? Am I seeing that?
But I don't think we don't have enough, we shouldn't give it this vague to
See,
Denise.
and I see it as we start with the select board work plan, and from all of those items should be a goal of mine to implement. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like, because that to me, part of my role is to implement what you want,
Policies, right.
your policies and what you want. So I feel like policy review, you'll give me a list of policies or say we want to start reviewing them, and then I can take those and present them back to you.
Mhm.
I feel like, because quite frankly, I'm going to be involved in all of your work plan items.
Right.
And so I think to have two separate work plans that may overlap in some capacity,
Mhm.
I do think that will be too much. That I have your work plan that I need to help implement, and then I have other work plan that's not your work plan.
Right.
So I think maybe starting with the select board's items and then figure out how I can then take that and.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense.
All right.
And we should say that, like 15 minutes ago.
It's all useful.
Where do we start? Do you want to start on things that either are particularly confusing or that you think are a lower priority or aren't on our work plan? I don't know. I'm not sure what to do with this list.
So Lower Village has its own subcommittee already. And so what I would like is for Denise's involvement with that would be for that subcommittee to be able to come up. There's some funding requests, there's some grant things. There are things that staff can provide that I think we've been talking through for the last couple of years. So I think that when I see Lower Village, it really is, there's more like a financial ask, but it's not necessarily like, maybe it would be that you meet with the Lower Village subcommittee, 3 times in 1 year, or to make sure that conversations that are being had in that subcommittee are doable, are things that we can actually get, solutions to, or we can get, that there's some kind of tangible thing that comes out of it.
Right, but I feel like, Lower Village specifically, Lower Village is, the Lower Village Revitalization Committee
Yeah.
is spearheaded by the planning board.
Right.
But to me, that should be a conversation with this group as well. Because,
Right.
What do you want to see down there?
Right.
Where do you want me to be investing my time when it comes to Lower
Right.
Village? And what are the priorities of you?
Right.
So that I'm not meeting with another group and running off in a completely different direction than you all had in mind.
Right.
So I think you should have a conversation about what you see with Lower Village, maybe on your own or with the
Yeah.
subcommittee. And then again, I can
And then
take
come
that
to
and
you.
try and
Yeah.
implement that with the Lower Village
Yeah.
subcommittee.
Yeah.
Because I think part of my, in the last 10 months or so, and it hasn't happened a lot because we've gone through a lot in the last 10 months, but, you all have your different projects, biking, Lower Village. I think I need something to then take all of that and figure out that, okay, this is what the board's focuses are so that I can then put resources into those items instead of just random calls that say, well, can you work on this? And then someone else says, well, can you work on this?
Right.
So I need a framework of what the board as a whole is expecting of, whether it's the next 12 months or the next 6 months, so that I then have some direction to know where I can focus. Obviously grants, grants could be one of them, as just an overall grant opportunities. And then we can fill in the different grant opportunities that are out there. But I think that for me is something that I would be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm looking down here and thinking it's a long list and wondering if there's anything that we think we don't want to have, that we don't have to do this year.
Well, I think again, like bylaw review, charter review, coordinate boards and committees is all sort of one
Right.
item. And that will be to boost up recruitment, to get boards and committee members, a charter review committee, a bylaw review
Right.
committee.
Right.
So that can all be sort of part of this whole recruitment and not necessarily individual items.
Mhm.
The other things, with the exception maybe of the IG investigation, are separate agenda items on future meetings to see where we are.
Right,
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
which we have that in September, we already talked about, right, having a sort of legal update.
September, yes, September will be the legal update, but I think to like define the role in the police accreditation would be an agenda item, right? Is that what you were referring to?
yeah, or,
Capital
policy
spending
review.
would be an agenda item.
Or
Mhm.
policy review might be 2 agenda items at 2 different meetings, and out of that come a list of 6 or 7 policies that are the priority to update.
Mhm.
You've been strangely quiet. Are you okay? Are you?
I'm just thinking, I'm not trying to interpret sort of what your statement is and trying to see how we can modify these 2 work plans into one such that it gives you a 100% full-time equivalent and not too much and not too little. And I'm struggling seeing our select board work plan translating unless we're all comfortable, and I am, of saying, here's a list of policies we'd like you to kickstart us with, come back with some precedent. And that to me is huge for the first 3 months. Just seeing what other places have, right? What do people have on on their climate change subcommittee? What does this look like in, give us, 5 towns and which towns should we be choosing from, right?
Mhm.
Because that's also a huge selection and what that looks like. And, but outside of that, I'm not sure how long that takes you because frankly, you're very efficient and really good at your job. So it gets to that point where I'm like, I know you can go out and find it very quickly because you know where to look, you know what you're looking for, you know which models you like to pull.
But if we set it as an agenda item for a future one, and that's the thing that you bring to us, I do think that those are things that would be helpful for us in making any kind of a decision, obviously.
Same thing with like building committee models, what other towns have.
Right.
But I think, with any work plan, it would be a combination of, quick, easy to access information and then longer term, like Lower Village, we're not going to solve overnight.
No.
But policies, you pick a policy, I can get you 10 of them within minutes. I mean, I have that network that I can just put out an email and get policies.
Right.
Those are the easy things that would be sprinkled around sort of the longer, visioning items that you have. So, police accreditation can be, maybe a more longer term. I would like to work with this board on more forecasting, whether it's capital, whether it's community preservation, whether it's just, forecasting of our expenditures that are coming down the line. I'd like to put together, whether it's infrastructure, that can be sort of a longer term that then you will then look at and decide, well, this is maybe where our priorities should be on spending in the next few years. So some of those would be longer term projects that I can work on. But I think that's something that we as a town need more of, more, 5, 10, 20 year.
Which sort of ties to this.
That clarity on capital spending,
Right.
for sure.
Yeah.
And I do feel like that needs to, if I were to prioritize anything on that, I need that to be number 1 or number 2, because we have so many things that are coming down the pike that we are aware of, and I want to make sure we're spending our money. I mean, obviously, but spending it smartly and reserving some of the money and not, and just really, and I don't feel like I'm schooled enough on what the current plan is, what the state requires, why we do things the way that we do them. And so I feel like I ask a lot of questions, but I still need more clarity on it because.
Well, I assume that was a
great to
big
ask questions.
item because, and I hate to quote Donald Rumsfeld, but there are known unknowns. So like the high school.
Yeah.
And then there's unknown unknowns. And I think here And Denise and I sort of had this conversation. We're great on predicting vehicle needs. We're bad at predicting building needs. Foxborough has something called the Permanent Building Committee, which seems to be a list, a bunch of professionals who just keep an inventory of their existing not new buildings, but their existing buildings and what's coming up and what roof is due, blah, blah, blah. I assume we have a spreadsheet somewhere that does something similar, but
No, we clearly
if
don't.
not-
We've never maintained our buildings.
Right.
Look how quickly they've fallen apart.
Yeah,
And I,
But there are
personally, I
grants
think
for
it's-
that.
yeah,
I also think it's unfair to place all of that on the current staffing levels of the
Yes.
building.
yes, yes,
I
absolutely,
cannot
absolutely.
keep up with that.
But it's
all
a
the other
volunteer
things.
board. These are permanent, these are boards, just like,
right.
I mean, and that's,
But
we
it's,
came up with
But it's
that.
professionals and it's people that are able to,
It's not even I mean, I will use the school building project as example. I spent 10 years working on learning everything that I didn't know about buildings, and then I didn't have anything else to do with it. I mean, it was done. Most towns I would have been on the permanent building committee, and then would move from the school project to, town building or community center. I mean, those things, you use all those skills, they don't change that much.
So-
It's building stuff, so.
danger of getting into weeds, Madam Chair, but yes.
Well, but
I
that's
think
an
we're all
example, that's why
yeah.
they have real permanent committee. I mean, I kept on coming across when we were doing that, like, oh, that's a permanent committee?
Right.
Oh, that's interesting. Because you're saying,
I want,
or you were
yeah,
saying about,
let's do
you know,
that.
I want one of those.
redesigning building committee models. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the obvious one.
But that would
But I
make
don't
sense.
think they would be the ones involved in the, when do we need a new roof? I mean, to me, that should be the.
That's like
you know,
town.
That would be bringing in a company, which we could get grants for, to do a full facility evaluation, provide us with, here's the 20 years of when everything is due to be replaced.
Yeah.
And then we then use that information to replace them in anticipation of things going versus.
Right,
If we do, because I think some of those assessments have been done in the past and then not been acted
follow through
upon.
on it, yeah.
Right.
And so we have
We're
decaying
volunteering
buildings
to
and things that have not been
Right.
maintained, and it's, for whatever reason, there are, we have a strong turnout and a strong vote for green space and not as much of a stomach for building preservation.
Right, but I almost think that a lot of that should be, whether it's an annual appropriation for building maintenance and we put money aside and we create a capital stabilization to do projects like that. So if we need a new roof, we have money set aside, or, you put 100,000 in a year and you start chipping away at, maybe there's smaller projects, but then you don't need to go to capital every year for doors and windows and
Right,
changing the ADA accessibility things. And
right.
you sort of have that money and you have your list of these are the items we're going to tackle this year. And then we just know every year we're going to have an appropriation to address some of these
That makes
things.
sense.
So one of the main policies under this one that I've been really thinking about is, are we operating under the if it ain't broke, don't fix it model? Or are we operating on in my opinion, a fiscally responsible model that is attempting to get ahead of these, which I always think is better, buck for your value? This is, I know, a town-wide conversation because both models have pros and cons. And I think for this board, that is one of the biggest things we have to let Denise know what we're trying to do. Because if this board thinks that if it ain't broke, don't fix it is a model we want to go with, then she should know that, because then she can be the chief fiscal officer as she is under the charter to do what she needs to do to propose that budget that matches our guidance. Or we choose that we want to modify that and we need to find a work plan that's going to help us modify to that different fiscal, operating budget plan. And I don't think this is an easy conversation. I think this is a really tough conversation because of where our taxes are and because of all of the fiscal pressures we have. That to me is a fundamental question, because all of these other details that we're getting to, right, of roofs and all these other things, all of it's impacted by that initial decision. So to me, this is a threshold decision I think as a board we have to hit, and it's not going to be easy. Maybe it's, let's start with what models exist and are there different models in different towns that we can even look at to try to wrap our minds around this type of policy question, because I think this is one where we're going to get a lot of feedback from folks, because this is a direct impact on what their tax bill is, and it's not an easy outcome in my opinion.
I think I kicked over hornet's nest. This whole thing is either a separate agenda item or a separate meeting. But I just want to respond to what Zach said. I think the answer to your question basically is, in theory, it's never been a if it ain't broke, don't fix it model. it's always been more long range in theory, but it's never had the adequate resources. And it really jumped the shark when we took over Pompo, because all of a sudden, that was what tipped the scale to now we have enough buildings that we need a more robust facilities department and a more robust plan. We're not too far from that point. It's very timely to have this conversation, but I didn't mean to get us on this whole thing. That's what I meant by we're getting in the weeds. I think we're using up valuable time on this.
No, it's, I mean, I just have to add that we did have the analysis that Courtney was talking about in buildings, and it was done by a volunteer committee, which maybe is why no one listened, because it wasn't done by professionals. I was on that committee, so I remember. We go through, I mean, we did that, we did it about available land, we did it about the buildings, and what buildings do we want to keep, and do we want to, you know, I mean, it was talking about things like, this is gonna need a new roof. We have totally been in the, if it ain't broke, don't fix it mode. I'm sorry, that was Bill's, it was over his head, because that's why we kept on, and how many times have we replaced the roof at Hale? Because we did the cheap one. Let's do really cheap. Oh, we have to patch it again. Oh, we have to
I don't
patch it.
know about that. That was never the
All right.
theory. It didn't get the resources.
Okay, he didn't ask for those. All right. Anyway, okay, so,
I would just
yes.
like to add one more comment.
Yes.
That is that I feel as though there's a lot of feedback either at town meeting or in other circumstances where there are members of the town who are concerned about their tax rates. And they give the message that they would like the if it ain't broke, don't fix method. And so it is a moment where we could have a conversation publicly and actually choose to move forward in a particular way. And it's really healthy to choose one or the other.
Yep.
And be
Absolutely.
overt about it so that
Yeah.
we can then just, you know, treat certain things a different way.
Same thing on roads.
Absolutely, it's on everything.
There
It's on
we
everything.
really, there we totally,
Right.
really have been, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And
yeah, that's right.
Steve has been trying to move us. It's all going to take money and resources.
Right.
So,
Okay, so we have this really long line. I mean, I think it's not as long, I don't know if I should rewrite it, but I think there's certain things that we've said are sort of combined. I hope I'm not mistaken. I took this one off of, because this is a bigger discussion, which is sort of tied to this. This is a big thing. This is sort of ties into these things. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the big ones that are here are forecasting infrastructure money, this whole discussion we just had. Policy sort of, I think part of the problem with the policy review is that there's the discussion about what policies do we have that we haven't looked at for a long time. Don't know that we should be reviewing. So there's that stage of it, as well as we want to have this, Denise, can you find us some new examples? So there's two parts of that, but I think that's an ongoing thing that I think will take many meetings.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
I feel like you have brought us policy since since you've been here. And I would like to know if there are some policies that are, I mean, I feel like you've brought to us some red flag ones that you were like, we need to move this forward. And absolutely, we can go through all of the policies. I'm just wondering if there are any other ones that you.
It's on the agenda for later.
Oh.
We're going to be talking
Oh,
about
right.
the work that they've done. That was on
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Denise, Joyce, update.
Well, so anyway, so
Yes.
on that kind of ties.
Yeah,
So,
that's fine. Yeah. Because that's the question. I mean, we'll hear how much they found and then we decide how we want to approach.
Okay.
I don't know how we're going to do it, but, so I hear that, I think transportation isn't a priority this year because, you know, I personally, like the shuttle that we got has been wanted for years. Now there's nobody using the train. So that's not going to happen. I don't know if it's a priority for this year.
I don't know. I mean, that'll change. What my idea on that actually is that transportation has always been something that people say they want, but we have difficulty assessing the demand. And we started to have this conversation when we got the grant for that call taxi service.
Yeah.
I would prefer to just try to assess the demand somehow, possibly through that. I'm not that, you know, I tend to agree with you. Either the use of the train comes back enough that we just say, hey, we got the money, let's implement that shuttle we were about to do. or we don't.
Mhm.
I don't necessarily view that as a big select board work plan policy.
Right.
I just don't want it to fall off the table.
And it won't, so we still have that grant funding and we appropriated $10,000 as well, so that is still something we look at and discuss,
I mean,
every
just-
couple months.
I mean, several years ago, there was a big push from some residents for a shuttle from the library to the Boys and Girls Club in Maynard. And that had the added advantage of alleviating some of the after-school crowd at the library. Lately, I've heard, why isn't there a shuttle to whatever they call the big, huge thing in Maynard now? I don't know.
Oh, the shopping center.
I don't know if I want to encourage that, but
Oh,
I'm just saying, it's, that's the sort of thing that if we don't try to assess that demand, how do we know what we're trying to, and then getting to a point Ellen has made frequently, which is, once we know what the demand is, are we linked up with the right regional transportation agency who can help meet that? And I don't know if we are.
So my quick question around that, those, like when we have a shuttle here or there, is at what time does it make sense for there to be a regional shuttle like there is out in like Bernardston, Northfield, tiny little towns out there, and there's a little shuttle bus that runs around probably a couple times a day or something. People can figure out their errands around the schedule. It's a bus. It's a public transportation bus that goes to different communities. It goes to the Parker Street Market Basket. It goes to the Boys and Girls Club. And
Right.
you can get on and off on it. I mean, when can we put our money into that instead and get, the region to just go for it?
So there are complications with that. I've actually spoken to Kate Hogan because one of my frustrations here is as far as regional efforts, we're part of MAPC, which covers pretty much from Linfield through Boston to Stowe. Whereas you have other parts of the state that have a smaller regional planning with 10, 12, 14 communities, and you can do many more of these regional efforts. But for us, we're competing against Boston, we're competing against Linfield, Saugus, much larger communities that have a need for transportation with Route 1 and access in and out of the city. And she called one day to see what our priorities were, and I said, well, can you create a smaller regional planning that covers, Metro West and just a smaller group of us? But, it's gonna take resources away from the state and it'll take them away from MAPC. But I feel like that's a deficiency that we have, that whether or not we can push the state for additional resources, but that's where we struggle with a lot of these regional efforts, is we're such a large region and competing against so many larger communities.
But, to the Regional Transit Authority, we could have been part of the Metro West Regional Transport, even though it's not part of, I don't actually know, the funding escapes me, but the RTAs have their own funding, and they come up to, as far as I know, they still come up to Acton and Maynard. So they're coming right here and taking people back down to what used to be the big hub, is the shopping, Shoppers World and stuff, but we chose to go with one that doesn't go anywhere. And they don't actually offer that kind of same regional bus system, so, to me, that's one of those things, but would this come up, like with the master plan, and master plan is supposed to set the priorities for the town, right? Wouldn't that come up the same way they did the survey, and I don't remember what year that was, like asking those questions, is transportation a priority?
Yes.
Yes, but it wouldn't necessarily result in a ban on the streets. If you're looking to cull this list.
No, but you were saying assessing the demand of transportation, wouldn't that come up within?
I don't think the master plan consultant,
No.
they might have a paragraph about it. I don't know. Maybe that's the answer to that. I don't think it is though, but maybe. If you're looking to cull that list.
Yeah.
Then I have to admit, transportation is not something that I have heard recently, but I think it's still out there. I don't think it's necessarily, we need to shuttle from A to B. I think it's more like assessing what the demand is, but I could see dropping it if we need to cull the list.
Is your suggestion, Jim, not necessarily culling, but prioritizing this list?
Yes.
Because I would rather prioritize and not drop anything from it.
Yeah.
But I'm not hearing anybody I mean, I heard two people say have some priorities, which doesn't fail. So go for it. What are the priorities from that list?
Okay.
We were wrapping this one and this
Yes.
one together,
Yeah, so
forecasting
capitals,
and capital.
handwriting's gonna obviously go over. Okay,
Some things are timely, the IG investigation, the police accreditation. So you either do them now or you don't do them at all.
Well, the IG investigation is not on our timeline though.
right, it's not on.
Oh, no, I'm just assuming it's the next fiscal year.
Oh, right, when it comes,
Right,
right,
right, you're not gonna be able to do anything with that, and if it slips, God forbid, then
Part of the capital spending infrastructure, we may also find that the climate change policy board, in terms of helping aid in a lens to view that capital spending infrastructure, is going to be a very helpful lens. I'm not sure if that means we establish that one first and then we move to that strategic part of that, because I see it as, if we're going to need to replace roofs, is there a better option based on, what is out there? And part of it's, obviously within your role, but also using experts in town who may have the ability to easy and quickly be able to, really bring those priorities to light. That's how I was viewing the climate change strategic plan, was really as a lens on that initial one, but I'd rather do that initial one first.
right. And I think, some of that will come automatically as the stretch code changes and we're required to implement those changes, which is why we're trying to get a jump on them.
Yeah.
So yes, I think, and that's one of the ones that, when the climate change information comes before the board, we will be looking for the board to establish a policy, or recommendations to start implementing certain things now that we can then filter out to all of our permitting boards and say, these are the goals of the board when it comes to climate change. And that we can start implementing some of these things before the state code changes and we are required to. But that's where then you'll all come in and really decide what your priorities as far as climate change would be, to then ask the boards to follow suit.
You said, what was the one before, aside from forecasting, you said, what was your priority?
It was capital spending,
Oh, that was
clarity
the
on
second
capital
one. Okay,
spending.
So that was that
Yeah.
one, okay.
I think some policy review is a priority, specifically policies about us governing ourselves as individuals and a collective body.
Mhm.
I think it's better to do that earlier rather than later.
I would also recommend the boards and committee
Oh,
discussion,
yeah.
because that comes up, whether it's appointments or discussions or liaisons or whatever it is, I think that can all be lumped into sort of one discussion.
Yeah, because we talked about the charter and bylaws, recruitment. To me, recruitment isn't necessarily the priority, it's the being clear on how are we making sure all these groups are working on the same priorities. I mean, we want people on the committees too.
I sense accreditation is
Oh.
something that's being worked on this year.
They've started.
I think that that needs to be on it, just because that's timely as well.
So
Right.
I just don't understand how is that our job versus the police department?
Well, you will implement the policies that come
Yeah.
down from the police department.
The police department recommends his suggested, well, I guess technically it's your suggestion, right, to us, and then we set that policy. I think it's critical. We have, maybe it's like a strategic meeting on it. I'm not sure if he's gonna bring it in parts or if you're gonna bring it, piecemeal. But maybe that's part of the structuring of that, where should it be necessary to form a strategic committee to aid in providing early input, because sometimes that's actually really critical on these policies, or whether this is really based on the new law, pretty, strict, which from what I read is most of what is coming down.
And it's just really making sure that our policies then reflect whatever they need to do to get accredited.
They do, but I think, obviously this board has the ability to solicit feedback and have the public dialogue. So, you know, a lot of the policies around accreditation will have to do with police reform and things like that.
Yeah.
There should be a public discussion about whether or not it's, you know, public input or just a dialogue that the public knows they're being worked on and this is what policies are being implemented. I think that's very important that, you know, this board actually have discussions. So maybe it's, I almost prefer piecemeal because then it gives you the ability to discuss maybe 3 policies at a time or 3 components of these policies, something to that effect, so that you're not overwhelmed with, here's all 5,000 pages of it,
Right.
but you can then take pieces and have a good conversation about it before they're actually implemented.
So would it be something like we put on the agenda once a month for, as they're working on it, for them to come before us and
Yeah.
have a discussion, or however you want to schedule it? Then it's 2 policies, 3 policies.
Yeah, I really see
Sort of.
both policies, the regular policy review and the accreditation, as almost an ongoing item that, you
Okay.
know, when you're not going to do every policy in one meeting. So
Right.
every meeting you can have another policy, and same thing, I'll talk to the chief and figure out what his timeline is with accreditation, if he has policies ready to go, or how that's, and then same thing, whether it's every meeting where there's just a section on policies, you know, board policies, accreditation policies. And I said to Ellen, I would like to, when it comes to policies, get in the habit of not having you approve them the same night. I think it's been not difficult, but you know, you all sort of make suggestions. You all say, well, I like to see this, I like to see this. And then I go back and I say, well, they didn't really vote on any of these changes.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think you should have your discussion. I then put the changes in and then you look at them again before they're adopted or
Absolutely.
implemented, so that there is that sort of review of what you all had to say and make sure that it was incorporated correctly.
Yeah.
Isn't he going to be learning about things that we're not doing quite as well?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So
Yes.
I want to have like a regular update on that kind of stuff. I mean, in general, I would like to hear from you and department heads about the stuff that we're not doing well. I remember the chair of the board I used to work for once, in the middle of another glowing report, said, you know, everyone's credibility is enhanced when they come in and they talk about things that they're not doing so well. But with the police, I would especially like to hear that. And Mike seems to be very good at that.
Yep.
Which leads me to the policy that I'd like to see us discuss soon, or, which is how to handle public events that are on various scales, that are not necessarily our town scale, and requests that we will receive to take a stance. I would like to have a discussion at a later date about how to approach those and how to graciously decline and how to accept, you know, and how to navigate that. Because I feel like it's a challenge for us. I feel like it could be possible that we could be spending an awful lot of time recognizing everything that happens in the world. And I mean, part of my humanity is caring about everything that happens in the world on some level, but then there's, you know, if I don't drink enough water, I'm gonna get a headache. So I have to prioritize everything on some scale from me out to the macro. And I'd like us to be able to do that.
I did have that on the agenda to have some, to talk about actually the framework for addressing it tonight.
Thank you.
Because we started down the road. No, I would like to go straight there right now, but.
No, it's great.
I think I think we're getting there on this. I mean, again, we still need to flesh out the SMART goals within all this, but are these, I mean, of that list was sort of, a lot of it is within these. I mean, we consolidated things, but is there anything missing?
The redesigning the building committees, I can't realistically claim that's a priority because we've gotten by for so long without it, but I think it's related to the first item. And I think,
Yes.
I think we're really not going to want to lose sight of that.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll be too difficult to get examples and have at least a brief discussion about it, and I think it'll pay off in the end.
And in some ways, the MSBA process made us do that. So, yeah. Anyway, okay. Okay, we're gonna move on from this. So Denise, do you want to give a quick update on where you and Joyce have been finding in terms of the policies? So where you,
So this is really Joyce has done the majority of going through and trying to find policies that we have. So we know that there's an alcohol policy. We've yet to actually find it, but we know one exists.
About
serving alcohol?
serving alcohol on town
It was a
property?
big deal.
Or-
Yes.
We
It was
enacted that like yesterday. I may have at least a late
Okay,
draft.
I think, yeah, that's one of those.
There's the SOPs for the Board of Selectmen, which I think we gave
Yeah.
copies of, which needs to be updated. There's the ethics, statement of ethics that was done in 2009 that needs to be updated. Records management policy, which was also 2009. There's a meeting package and distribution policy from 2007 that is part of the SOPs, but is listed as a subheading. There's a complaint management policy from 2010, a donated benches policy from 2011, an acceptance of gifts policy from 2012, and then the one that we are actively working on, because it obviously came up at the last meeting, it will continue, is this whole event license. We have put together sort of an ad hoc list of requirements that we have sent out to Megan, who's running the race for the woods, race for the woods.
Are they doing it again?
Yes, and
Yeah,
it seems like
and
it's
it's not me.
expanding.
To be clear.
Yes, no,
It is a
not this
different
Megan.
Yeah.
But it's expanding, and so we gave them a very lengthy list of
Yeah.
what they would need to provide in order to come before this board. The Lions Club reached out today that they want to start having events with food trucks on their property. I need to sort of understand the difference between our property and their property. That's going to have major traffic implications and what we can and cannot require when it's their private property. So those kinds of things we're still working on, but we clearly need a policy.
Yeah.
We have the one that was put together a few years ago that never actually went through, but we need a form, we need specific requirements, and so we are working on that. And so I don't know, I mean, I don't know if you really need a donated benches policy, but we can certainly look at that and revise it, or at least make sure you're all aware of the policy that exists. So, I mean, I think some of these.
Move that to the top of the list.
Yeah, right.
So I think Ellen will agree with me.
Yeah.
Many of those things,
Yeah.
the older ones, 2007 to 2010, were created by specific incidents where things went sideways. And I don't
In
know,
specific staff or
yes,
website.
went sideways. So they may not have ever been looked at again because the incident was gotten past.
But I do think it's helpful to have sort of your standard operating procedure book, so that when someone new comes in, I mean, not unlike the MMA handbook, to say, here it is. And you can see, maybe it's just for meeting packet says, 48 hours prior, you'll receive an emailed meeting packet. Something, it can be very basic, but it should at least articulate, some of these things. The complaint management, I actually haven't read myself, but, I think we should just look at any policy. I mean, these are all 10 years plus. They should at least be revisited whether it's 5 years or something, to just keep these policies
Well,
fresh.
and I was excited because Joyce actually already has a notebook
Yes.
with the binders and, tabs and stuff. So she's already working on, she has the table of contents, because I said, well, I have a list of things I've been collecting. So I sent them to her and she already had the
Yes.
same list. So
Well, because I think I mentioned to you that when I started, I said to the woman in the office, like, do we have policies somewhere? No. I said, like, nowhere. How do I know what policies exist? And then that's when I started writing policies and found out, we've adopted one 2 years ago, but it doesn't exist anywhere. So, so the policies that have been in place, at least since I've been here, they're on our website, they're in Joyce's book, they're accessible. But it's that kind of stuff that we don't even know what exists as policies because they were never kept anyplace.
Right.
So.
And how realistic or how far back do we go looking? Sort of like with the minutes, like, because I mean, and Zach, I think at one point, let's just say that they're all, put on hiatus or whatever. whatever the word, the legal word is, but, you know, but it would be interesting to know, I mean, are there policies that were written that we'd actually say were appropriate still, but we just don't have record of it? So I guess the question is it, what makes sense in terms of, you know, spending Joyce's time going back through whatever she would go back through, I'm not even sure, minutes or file cabinets. I mean, I was going through old emails trying to figure out if I had old policies, but yes.
So when I became general counsel of the agency that I became general counsel of,
Yeah.
I had the same problem. And I spent about 6 months going through minutes back to the 50s
Yes.
and trying to find these references to policies and things. And I put together a book, and I did not find everything. And I found lots of references to policies, but they never found the actual policy. But what the board wound up doing is they tasked someone, me, with putting together the best you possibly could. And then at a meeting said, this is our
Adopting
policy
that.
manual,
Yeah.
our existing policy manual. Then we started going through each of
And
them
then those,
and to see, threw some out, edited some, added a ton.
Yeah.
So I would suggest we do something like that.
Yeah,
At
makes
some point, we
sense.
just say she's done all she can.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how much more she'll find, you know, even in the last 10 years, but we certainly can continue to look. But I think even if we find them, they're going to be outdated and will need to be updated anyway. So it's almost better to start from scratch with a lot of these things and just.
Yeah,
and sort of for legal reasons, would we just sort of say, you know, as of this date, any policies not on this list, we consider to be void or whatever, just to cover ourselves from.
Yeah, you
If someone comes up with some policy we approved 30 years ago, that we can't find her.
We could come up with a manual and say this supersedes all prior.
Right, yes, well, that's, I mean, I think
Yeah,
that's right,
yeah.
right, so it's at some point, right. Okay,
Maybe not this year.
yeah, maybe not, right, yeah. So I thought that, given, you know, the framework for discussing the, you know, social issues, basically, you know, whether it's Pride or Black History Month or whatever, it seemed, you know, this was my biggest concern, that we didn't have a policy on it. And if we just start approving, then we really can't say no to anybody. And, you know, found an example of, you know, one person goes to a board and asks to have India Day. And I mean, how would we say no to that? Because if we said yes to one policy, we have to say yes to, or one holiday or acknowledgement. So I think, I don't know if we can do this tonight. I mean, you know, we could spend 15 minutes and just talking about it, but I think having some sort of framework, we can say, how do we want to approach the issue? You know, I don't want it to be a specific, I don't want to talk just about Pride. I want to talk about the idea, like, and even is the way to recognize it, is there a proclamation? Is it, you know, a statement? Is it, I don't know what, you know, a flag, whatever. There's a lot of ways you can recognize it, and if you look at different towns doing different things. So I'd say, you know, I just open it up and then we can see where we go. Yes.
So I have been thinking about this and what our role is. And I think there's the two questions that we ask when these things are brought to us is, do we have a policy in place that currently supports, or a policy in place currently that supports whatever the ask is? Can we make updates to a policy that does support it? And I think that's important, right? We need to make sure. Having said that, I think it's also very important to make statements that show that all members of our community are welcome. And in turn, our basic policies should be in support of that. And so I think, yeah, that's my thoughts, basic thoughts right now. Because I do think that, well, I don't know, I'll let somebody else talk. Anyone else?
Brittany, you started earlier.
I have to recapture that.
No, yeah, I just, if you have more thoughts, more specific on.
Well, I'm truly not exactly sure how to proceed. I just feel as though I certainly would like to be supportive, to be welcoming and to be supportive of causes, and at the same time, I just don't want to get caught up in, something like India Day, which in itself is fine. It's just how do we get in the position where we have to choose? I mean, is there some point at which we wind up feeling like we're saying we don't have time for this in some way, which isn't going to be appropriate, so not getting boxed in that. So, how can, is there a way that we do things on the website? Is the website enough to state our views? If we need to publicly state them in meetings, and that's the question first.
Right. Yeah, Jim.
I sort of approached this subject a couple of days ago. I'm not necessarily in favor of statements alone for a couple of reasons. Although I recognize that they provide support, much needed support to certain people in the community, they also, we represent everyone in the community. And in today's very divided society, your statement can be taken as a vote of, I stand over here with these people. I'm progressive and not whatever. The other thing on a more practical level is the chair has hinted at this, is it needs a limiting principle. Are you just going to do this all the time? What's your standard for who you do this for, who you don't? That being said, I may not be in favor of statements alone, but I do like the idea of a statement coupled with something more substantive, something educational. And I have been struck in the past several years by the number of things that were not taught to me in public school. And I consider that we have a library and a public school system. I would wish we could partner with someone to say there's going to be a book of the month, a book of the quarter on these sorts of issues. In conjunction with that, there would be a statement of support.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's different than the mere statement. That is almost challenging someone with a different view. Hey, how about taking a few hours and reading a book and then let's talk about it. I favor something like that. And that also incorporates the limiting principle that I'm looking for, because presumably the library or whoever can't do this more than X times a year. They just don't have the capacity.
I think they also are doing things.
Well, I saw
And so I think that if we can partner with the library, or we can partner with an organization and really make it's not just the select board is saying this, but it's the community as a whole, I think that's great. And you're right, it's like we've got these resources. And then if people come to us and say, but we really would like to do this, great, then you educate yourself on X, Y, and Z or whatever it is. And I think that's important. I think that we are in a position where we can not only just make a statement, but we can, again, enact policies to back it up. We can direct people towards education. We can do those things, and I think we should do those things. So yeah, I like that.
I thought I saw something in the paper, and maybe this is what you're talking about, where they're partnered with somebody they actually provide, they pay for the book. If you sign up, they buy the book for you. That's the direction I personally like to go.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like it was far more significant, like that we had, that Mike had a policy way ahead of most of the state, on how to treat trans people. I mean, that's to me a far more significant and fits in with what we should be doing, which is ensuring that we have policies that support that, the diversity, or, basically everybody in town feels like they're being heard. Yeah.
Well, I think this goes back to the work plan discussion, that if the board's work plan is to increase diversity outreach, then I can work with department heads, recreation, council on aging, library, police, to then say, where should we be focusing our efforts, and then do something. The library could come out with a book, we can work with the council on aging to maybe have a program on it, we can see if recreation can do something. We can sort of publicize it as, again, more of a town resource, and then have something, this is Black History Month, these are the events that the town is sponsoring this month, and have sort of a number of things that we can then say. It's more than just a statement, that we're trying to actually increase awareness and increase, social justice causes amongst our community members, and reach more than, the different populations that may not have been participating.
I want to re-say what I think you said, but in a different spin. This is about leading.
Is what?
This is about leading. Denise just said, if you can lead, I can make it happen. That's how I see this policy. This policy is something that gives us a voice with our community. Jim, you said it correct when you said that it can really have an impact on people's lives. It can, it does. Statements do. They don't go far enough, but we got to start somewhere. And that starting somewhere is having that statement and following it up. And I love that our conversation has already gone beyond the proclamation, because that to me is a big step. I've been railing on the proclamation because I want to start this conversation. It's important. But I think it's about leading, and it's not just leading on social justice causes. It's Bike Safety Awareness Month to me. It is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. It is leading on causes around our community and raising those people up and letting them know that they're here. We see them. We want to raise education and awareness of what this looks like. A Disability Awareness Month. We can focus on all of these issues, and it helps us have a theme in town. I love agencies. I love the library. I don't see it as, yes, it is partnering in the sense that we're a team, but we're leading this team to helping our town understand your neighbor. And I think that's where we can really have an impact. And I'm excited by what I hear here, but I want us to really see this as leading. And I don't want us to see this as limiting either. So you talk about the limiting threshold. I like that, right? If we can put an educational event with it, then that would be wonderful, right? Like that's that threshold. I think that's an amazing limiting factor. But I don't want to limit us on topic, because part of this is also an outlet for folks who want to raise an awareness for an environmental fund or conservation or trail maintenance, or this can be multifaceted. This need not be one thing. And I want us to take advantage of that. Actually, I want us to, find groups in town and get them more engaged, because I think that if we lead in this, we actually will find more engagement. And I think that's going to aid in a lot of the things we want to move forward. And the last thing I want to say is these statements also matter because we have employees that fall in these groups. And we're creating an environment that allows Denise to lead in that environment, as she has been doing, and I think amazingly has been doing, like with Juneteenth, that lets people know that Stowe's open for business. We want you to work here. We want you to love working here. We want you to feel like you're accepted in all of your capacity here. And I think that's where we can come in to really help that everything you're doing is within the purview of the way this board sees us moving. And so, I know I've been pushing proclamation, but I want to go beyond that. I want to go way beyond that. I want us to really take this as an opportunity to celebrate our town and people in our town and employees of our town. That's my core thing here, because I see this as a tool for us to really start to think about themes in this town and really start to talk about topics that affect everyone in town. We represent everybody, and I want us to really hold that to heart here in these statements.
So I'm still concerned, to Jim's limiting principle, that where does this, if every proposal came with, and it's going to be coupled with education with the library or whatever, I'd be much more inclined. But I don't see, we literally could be overwhelmed with, requests all the time. And to me, I think it loses its value that way.
Sorry.
It's okay, I just wanted to say, how do we choose, or how do we,
I don't know that right.
or what is, what is the means by which we get items and then decide perhaps
Right.
amongst them? Like if we have 6 candidates for a month.
So my concern is that how do I say this? I don't want to not try this because we're afraid that we're going to get overwhelmed by it. I don't want to do that. I do think if someone comes to us and says, I'm interested in doing this, or Bike Safety Awareness Month, great. If you'd like it to be something, you need to also come up with a couple of other things that you could partner it with. Like, it can't just be somebody writing in and being, I can't come up with something off the top of my head right now. Do you know what I mean?
Ask
Like,
for 20 signatures. Ask for
yeah,
20
I
folks
mean,
in
yeah,
town to
20,
support
yes, a
something. I mean,
petition, yes, absolutely. Well, can we do that?
No, you can, but I also think, again, I think we have great resources working here, that if I say to a number of department heads, you know, what are things that we could celebrate? I mean, we know the police already recognizes autism awareness. We can build upon that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this should be driven from either, you know, the employees up to you. Obviously, if there's specific criteria, but I don't know that we should be right now actively soliciting residents to start throwing ideas in. I think if we start it, it probably will come. But I feel like we should just start by seeing, you know, let me have a meeting and see, you know, what are some of the things that the library already does? Or what are some of the things that recreation may be involved with, or the Council on Aging? I know the Council on Aging does their newsletter, and they always highlight certain events. You know, maybe we can just take that and expand upon it, and see what we can come up with for, you know, not necessarily starting small, but starting somewhere.
I agree, and I appreciate you taking this conversation past the identitarian issues, because it's not about that. It's about more than that. But I have to say, even on something, you know, I guess y'all think I'm some sort of cycling nut, but you know, something like Bike Safety Awareness Week, a mere statement on Bike Safety Awareness Week, well, that would be nice, but that wouldn't be, even for me, that wouldn't be that big of a thing. The state does that. I'd rather get some money. But a 15-minute conversation where we had either the group, the leader of one of these many groups with bike rides going through our town, and then, you know, Mike Solis Senior, hey, Mike, you know, what are some of the issues that you have with cyclists on the road? And he gives us the good and the bad, and hopefully says something along the lines of, yeah, you know, we recognize they're vulnerable users. That's worth more to me than any statement.
Or we pair with, I've seen communities who have gotten grant funding for bicycle helmets for kids.
You
So
can
we-
invite nonprofits and
Right, and so we can do-
Or even just an awareness message. I mean, we could
Right.
certainly, we can use our website, our social media that says, you know, it's bike
Right.
safety, I don't even know if it's a
Right.
month or a week, but
Right.
Bike Safety Awareness Week, and, you know, here are the programs, here are some things to look out for, here are some tips from police and fire.
Right.
I mean, we can, I mean, quite candidly, I pay a PR firm. I can tell them a topic and they're gonna
Right.
say,
Right.
these are things that we've worked on in other
Right.
communities, and they can help
Right.
us sort of direct, you know, some awareness communication that goes out that then we add our own spin to, that says, you know, these are the tips to watch out for, and then here are the things that we're doing
Right.
to complement that.
So I see 2 conversations happening. I see one with regards to what actions are going to be attached to any statement. I see that, but I see a fundamental question by you too, and I want to address that, I think, head on, which is, so how do we choose? What if we get 6? Like every other community in Massachusetts does this. We're not making the wheel here.
Right.
Okay? Like, this is literally the biggest towns, the biggest cities, the smallest ones. You know, we're one of the few not to make a pride statement. We're one of the few, like, to not go through this policy. And I think that's meaningful, because a lot of smart people are sitting on these boards, and a lot of smart people are thinking through these policies. And they're making these decisions, and their towns are making these statements, and they're doing educational stuff, and they're doing all of these things. You know, at some point, the answer is, that's what we do when we have to lead. We have to make decisions. We have to put this out there. We have to attach it to education. That's what it means. And you know, I hear these theoretical concerns, but they're theoretical to me. You know, it's real life when there's a bicyclist on a road who's going through safety, having safety issues down Wheeler Road because no car wants to actually move over for him, even though there's a solid, you know, what does that bike symbol mean on the road? It means they get the whole road, guys. That means you can't actually pass, you know, like this is a real thing, and nobody knows that down Wheeler Road. I'd like to focus on that. And I'm comfortable with that. I'm also comfortable if there's 6 different folks in town who want to celebrate 6 different things in a month. Listen, I'm going to celebrate everything I can celebrate, and I hope they celebrate more. This is about celebration to me. And the picking and choosing, I don't have a problem with that. I don't really feel like I'm going to be picking and choosing. In fact, I think I'm going to be trying to say the more the merrier, and the more we can educate our town folk to know their neighbor, the better. So, you know, I know there's, you know, controversial of like, oh, we're going to do like, you know, I've seen this in you know, legal literature, right? Well, what if you turn down a satanic worshiping, this, that? Oh, okay, I hear it. The answer is, as a town, I'm just for celebrating people in our town. I want people to understand people. And, you know, these fringe issues become, I think, hindering core fundamental movement and leading that this board, I think, needs to do. And so, like, I'm on this side where I'm looking at this of how do we do it and do all these other things, because that's fundamental. I can't imagine doing just a proclamation without action. I love it. I just can't buy into the theoretical argument that if 100 and some other Massachusetts towns are doing it, that somehow we're going to run into a problem. They've been doing this for decades.
I'm confused about where you are, because you just said you can't imagine issuing a proclamation without an action. At the same time, you're talking about, but we could do 6 or 8 a month. So I'm just confused about where you are.
I think that there's community groups doing things that we should be celebrating with. I think there's a lot of community groups. I think this is about that threshold question of is it just getting signatures? So we know there's a small quorum of folks, right? It's the 8 people in pickleball want a pickleball awareness month, and we celebrate it and we let them do it. And that to me is great. You know, they're celebrating a sport. They love that sport. I think it's wonderful. I hope it comes with education, and they try to say, well, listen, we're going to be at the Marlboro courts, and so on these days, and come in, and we advertise that. I think that's wonderful. It doesn't always necessarily mean town resources. I think town resources is where we say to Denise, these are our proclamations. And he says, I'm working with the library, and it seems like most people are interested in these, so I'm going to try to capitalize on, you know, where we're at. I leave the day-to-day to very capable hands to run that down and use town resources wisely. You know, otherwise, I want to celebrate all of these, you know, smaller sports and get folks involved in celebrating, and hopefully more people join pickleball, and that would be wonderful for them. And it's a learning opportunity and a community building opportunity. So that's sort of where I'm at on this crossing discussion.
I also think the more we open it up to people, the more engaged people will be, the more people will want to participate in the community. And so I think that, yeah, that's why it is important to make sure that.
So nuts and bolts, so we just, is this part of our public input and board members' comments period of our
So
meeting?
that's
You know,
my,
just kind of take a chunk of time, 10 minutes, and these are the things that, you know, are coming up this week for this meeting.
Yeah.
We're, you know, we're excited to say, you know, there's pickleball championship, there's, you know, there's Pride Month, there's the bicycle awareness, there's more information on our website. I mean, is that?
I think that makes sense. I think if we had 10 minutes, I think we had, is this on? No. What? I was going to say, I know that it had gotten brought up in one of our meetings about having board comment time. And so it could fall under that time, right? So yes, nuts and bolts as far as how things are recognized. But I do think that in that same breath, making sure that there is a petition if it's going to be a bigger, actually, I'm thinking this through and I'm stopping.
Well, is there a threshold for the petition? You're interesting me, because you're suggesting another limiting factor, which is there have to be people in town engaged in this.
Yeah, so I think that unless you get 25, whatever the number of it is, signatures, I mean, is that a way to weed out? I don't know.
Is that
I
fair?
don't know, because
Is
I don't,
that fair?
right, that's why I stopped. Because you
Well,
don't,
Why not? Why is it?
maybe it's not
Well,
25, maybe it's.
There's a distinction from just sort of making an announcement to then having a partnership with the library or whatever.
Well, right, so that's what I was trying to work through as well. So it's,
Well, and I would say they're two different things.
right,
I think the partnerships with town departments is coming through me and working with the departments to see, what are the issues that we want to recognize and we can actually celebrate. And then there are the ones that, August 14th is India Day, and do you just say, yes, we declared India Day in Stowe? I mean, that's what they did in Boxborough. Someone requested it, they just made an announcement at their meeting and moved on. I think those are two different things.
Mhm.
And I think, I think we need to be careful that even if someone comes up with 20 signatures for an obscure day, that we
Right.
then are not required to then
Right,
use town
right,
resources to
right,
put an
right,
event
right,
on.
right.
I think that needs to be driven from the departments that say, yes, we can do this, we have ideas for this, we have resources that we can put towards this. I think they're really two separate things. And obviously the big things that are already recognized, Black History Month, Women's History Month, Pride, Indigenous People, Columbus Day. I mean, those are already things that are recognized and worked on in the library and, some aspects of the Council on Aging. Same thing in breast cancer awareness, autism awareness. I mean, those things we can certainly do easy enough because they're so widely known and there are enough resources that there are books on it, or maybe we get a speaker that can talk about some of these things. It's the ones that other folks are gonna come and say, hey, we want this recognized. I think that's the question of how you handle that. And is that just on the agenda, okay, this month we've had a request to declare India Day, so August 14th is officially India Day. I don't know that you really need to declare something like that. I don't know how that works, but
Well, and also
that's what happens
right.
in other
I
communities.
guess if we get a request, if we want to be inclusive, then we're going to say yes.
Or we
Would
just
you
say we'll
that
make the
again?
announcement.
I didn't hear.
So if we get a request for something,
Seems more obscure.
that seems obscure, or if, I'll just say this again, if we get a request, we will honor it. Because, you see, in my mind, being inclusive means that I can't judge.
Right.
It is just not up to me to judge. So if somebody says, I want you to say blah, blah, blah in the meeting next Tuesday, I'm gonna say yes, because we have been asked, and so there is some threshold where somebody says, I want you to say something really horribly mean or inappropriate, and we'll say, no, we're not gonna say that. But any other request, there's no judgment.
I think that robs it of a little value. I think it becomes like Congress naming post offices, just something they do for 15 minutes before every session, and it's completely meaningless, and they change it the next week. What happens when you've got a conflict? In October, we're going to have one day, that has two competing constituencies. What happens when we get both requests?
We recognize them. We say we have.
What happens when we get one request from one not to recognize the other? Because they are diametrically
That's what they do,
opposed.
right.
I
Personally, my
You see-
point of view is that then we say, we've had two requests which are conflicting, and they disagree with each other, and those are the requests we've had. And it's just a statement of fact. Because if we're gonna be inclusive, everybody is here with it. We're all, the people that I don't like and that I don't agree with are members of the human race on the planet. And if I'm gonna be inclusive, then they're in the game.
Well, I understand. I'm not sure I can go that far. I like where a lot of this conversation has gone. Obviously, I like the part about, the town departments trying to do some substantive for the big ones. I even and really kind of coming around to the idea that there is a substantial presence in town just looking for support, and they get over some kind of threshold, and it's sure, and they come in, they spend 15 minutes explaining to us what this is, why it's important. to me, that hits that substantive threshold.
Mhm.
And it's not just a vote in the identitarian partisan wars going on out there. But then you're sliding over into just a vote, and I'm not quite with you on that one. But that's why there's 5 people on the board.
Yeah, because I mean, I find there's some line between announcement, like, we want you to, will you announce that it's India Day? Absolutely. But somehow a vote, and that feels like it takes on more responsibility
Mhm.
that I'm not sure. That's when I get sort of caught up. And to play devil's advocate, I mean, we have a lot of conservative people in this town. So how are you going to feel when they want to support something that some of us would feel really uncomfortable supporting? You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's going to go both ways, and that's why I'm surprised, and I'm trying to accept. It's like, okay, if people are really cool with this, okay, but it's going to be interesting.
You see, and to me, there is some weird difference when you do something like with a book. You know, I have a problem, just a statement, but I have no problem saying to an arch conservative friend, hey, I think you ought to read Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. In fact, I'll buy it for you.
Yeah.
And then, 3 weeks from now, let's get together for coffee and talk about it. I don't have any problem with that.
Mhm.
I don't know why. That's the line I'm trying to draw.
Mhm.
But hey, if I'm in a minority, I'm in a minority. That's all right.
Well, can I ask, do you
I'm
need
not
to
gonna
take a
vote.
vote?
Yeah.
Or what if you just say, this week we choose to or we're recognizing these, so if someone does come forward, you can acknowledge them
Right.
versus taking a formal vote. I mean,
Yeah, I think, yes, I like that. Because it's been acknowledged. And you're not, I mean, I can see what Ellen's saying, I can see what everyone's saying. You're right, if things come down that you are diametrically opposed to, and then we're voting I don't know. I can see how that could possibly get really muddy. Yeah.
And I think that covers for the sort of the general population requests. I mean, we can still decide, there are the big ones we as a board support doing, and particularly because we're going to connect them to agency, education.
And connection with
Right.
other, departments in town, and I think that is, to Zach's point, that is how we lead.
Right.
And I think that's tremendous, right? It's not just, I'm saying that this is what this is, I'm saying these are the resources
Right.
to celebrate it, to learn about it, to whatever.
Right.
And it feels to me that, at least on that point, that we are in some kind of Congress, that it is, that is how we would want to move forward, at least on that part. Am I, yes?
Yeah, I think that's
Maybe so. Quiet. You're
Can I
not
re-say
nodding.
it just to
Can I
make sure I
re-say it?
understand? I'm trying to make sure I understand.
Like it's 9 o'clock and I'm very tired. Yes. So what I'm saying is that on the larger month declarations, that as if it's something that we can tie to education, we can tie to working with other departments, that's something I would feel more comfortable taking a vote and saying the select board is behind this because we're giving you all of this additional information and recognizing it in that way. I feel like I said this better 5 minutes ago.
I feel like what I'm hearing is town folk write in, we have our own ideas.
Yeah.
We have a list of 10 things and we say 9 of them is going to be just chair's comments, just an announcement of the day of these things have been read in. The board wishes to specifically look at this policy and we want to do this, but that is the proclamation. I think, again, to me, when we talk about inclusion, I'm fine with that. Like, I don't, when I think about, well, it's obscure, it's something I don't know.
When you're learning more about it.
I'm going to Google it when it comes in front of us. As soon as I see it on the agenda from Ellen, I'm going to be like, what is this? And that's important for us too, because we have folks in town that are asking for that, whether it's conservative, liberal, I don't really care. I want to know what it is.
Mhm.
And that's important because to me, it's about education, whether you agree or disagree. But I'm comfortable with that discretion of what we want to make into larger educational sessions. I think that's the discretion this board has. And I think that I'm not scared to take that vote. I'm not scared to put that out there. And I want to be inclusive on that. I want to be reaching out and I want to be celebrating folks that, I don't ride a bike, but I'm totally happy to see what this all looks like and want to run that down. And I'm fine with that because there are various groups in town that are going to celebrate differently. But I'm not scared to emphasize or de-emphasize based on being a member of this board and putting my vote, on the table. I'm fine with that. And so, but I do think that there's an inclusiveness of putting it out there. If someone says India Day, great. India Day, here it is. I want to Google it and figure out what that is. And we all should. And that's important because, that was a request from somebody.
So, I mean, we could just add to the agenda, whether it's at the beginning of the meeting or at the end of the meeting, a recognition section. And if there's 3 days, India Day, just India Day, August 14th, and it's just read off as part of this meeting we're recognizing India Day, or we're recognizing National Pancake Day, and go to Stowe Cafe and eat pancakes.
Right.
I mean, well, but I mean, quite frankly, it could be. And if they came forward and said, we're running a promotion for National Pancake Day, I mean, it could certainly be something that's part of the recognition if you're just going to make a general comment versus do this whole
The bigger.
I don't want to prolong this, but if nobody comes in for National Pancake Day,
No, we're not just putting it on the agenda.
oh, okay.
No, that's if someone asked.
But Andrew comes in,
Yes, right.
hopefully with pancakes.
Well, that'll be a prerequisite, yeah.
Examples.
Yes, no, if someone came forward and said, we want to, if there's something,
Actually.
Aviation Awareness Month, they want to they'd ask us to recognize that they're doing an event at the airport.
Yeah, no, I'm totally on board with that, and
And we can either have it as a separate thing or just put it as part of the board comments.
Right, either way, but at least if it's on the agenda, maybe it just becomes sort of commonplace that these are the things that have come forward.
Cool, okay. All right, I think.
So do we want a policy on this? Or do we sort of all?
Yes, exactly, that is my question.
Yep. Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
You
Are
were
we-
great on your agenda until that. You were terrific.
She jumped on it, I had it, I was about to write down, so next step is.
I was impressed by the time.
Oh, by the
You were-
time,
you were
yeah,
right
except
on,
that
you were
there's-
like a train.
Well, we're gonna not do the appointments process, but that's because we sort of combined it into other things. So, and we already talked about other policies to review when we started that list. So, but in terms of this particular policy, are we asking Denise to draft something? Or does someone like to take it on?
Oh, I think Denise.
Denise, are you okay taking this on?
Yes, I will need to put some thought into this because a lot was said tonight, but I will work on a policy.
Well,
I just don't know what to call it.
right.
Recognition?
It's very, yes,
Recognition policy?
Yeah, as long as it's not personal recognition. but- Well, that's true. We have,
The
like-
draft may get amended.
Absolutely.
Getting a
That's
draft
right.
will
Yes.
just get clear.
There you go.
Yes, yes.
So the calendar meeting schedule thing, we talked about some, I just wanted to be clear that I think, and Denise mentioned it earlier, that the idea is that anytime we're talking about a policy, we'll have at least another reading of it. It'll come back at least once, if not more than once.
Yeah.
That we're gonna explicitly never approve it the first time we see it, because we know that we need time to spin it around in our heads and think about it. So I just wanted to make sure that that's, and I also hope that every meeting will have some amount of time, little tiny hands, I hate little tiny hands, to have a bigger discussion, whether it's about a policy draft or about something else that we're not just only gonna be doing appointments and then I'm gonna, in my head will say, I'm gonna plan 30 minutes at least of every meeting that we can have some larger discussion, even if it's like, we don't have anything to talk about, any suggestions, so, whatever.
No, I think that's important.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is like, I
Well,
want our time to be spent
Check
exactly on
me,
that.
talk to me in September and see if I'm stuck with it, so.
Yeah.
Denise will probably keep me.
Well, I think
so.
along the
I think
same
so,
line, we could just
allowing.
add like a strategic planning on every agenda.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
ongoing policy discussion.
Right.
And we have these topics that will need to be discussed.
Yeah.
Can
for a number of meetings.
serious
Right.
note to this part,
Yes.
which is if we don't have a policy that's ready for like proper discussion, I like also seeing draft policies of an idea that one of y'all have of like,
Yeah.
hey, this is something I've been mulling over and I chatted with Denise and
Yes.
like, I'm happy to discuss it and then postpone it just because I want to sort of like, we don't have time obviously because of open meeting law to
Well,
like
that's what we just
actually
did.
substantively talk
Right,
about this.
right,
in here.
right.
And so if we could somehow manage like to integrate that in where I can see like,
Absolutely.
Jim's thinking about this policy and I can
Yeah.
like engage with it and actually think like, where are we at, and then we can make the decision to move forward, do we want to revise, that would be wonderful.
Right. Well, and that's
We'll
exactly what we just did,
back
right?
into our alcohol policy discussions.
Well,
Right.
but to some extent though,
Yeah,
I can't have 5 of you calling and saying I have a policy idea.
Yeah.
So there has to be some discussion ahead of time
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
that can be thrown out at a meeting and have some discussion and be like, yes, that's great. But I can't just have everyone say, hey, I want a policy and then me bring it forward.
right.
yeah, no,
No, but I think that's what we just did. I mean, we
Yeah.
had this topic, we put it on the agenda, we just had a half an hour roughly of conversation about it, and now we're ready to start drafting the
Yeah.
policy. So
Yeah.
I
So that's
totally
what I
agree.
want is that level,
Yeah.
just because I really enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah.
'Cause I can really hear how each one of you are thinking about the topic
Yeah.
and engage with it.
Right.
So I
yeah, leaving that on an agenda as an
Yes.
open item, I think is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, it's
phenomenal.
But, I'm gonna have Steve in my head.
I was suggesting I'll be the last.
And then we did, when we were looking at the calendar idea
Uh-huh.
of putting a budget meeting, I'm looking at the draft you just handed out, now I can't find it. Where did I go? Did you put a budget?
I did not because I thought we were going to discuss
I
it.
have the old one. Anyway, at some point, we were thinking roughly 6 months from now, we'd have another planning workshop that would probably be mostly around the budget kind of things. So we're sometime in the December, January
Mhm.
timeframe.
Okay.
It just seemed like twice a year is a good amount of time to have one extra meeting to have this sort of larger conversation on things that aren't about the day-to-day business.
And I would actually recommend, I thought about it more. I think it should really be November-ish.
Oh, November, okay.
Before I even send out the budget message, because if we all get together and the roof is collapsing and we know that we're gonna need resources for a roof, then that will go into how I then ask departments to put together their budget. So I think to really kick off the whole budget season, it should be like October, November, before capital really gets going,
Right.
before community preservation gets going, and
So-
have a joint boards meeting so everyone knows where we're
Right, so
heading into-
so when we talked about it before, we actually talked about that joint boards meeting with finance and capital planning and CPC in
Yes.
October.
Yes, okay, so we
Right.
did talk, I think so. I think that makes sense.
So, but that would be more part of our regular meeting and then maybe do a separate, no?
I think
We
you
don't
should do a
need another
separate
budget
meeting of the,
Joint boards meeting?
That's a great idea.
Yeah,
I think you should do a separate night of the joint, of
Okay.
all the financial boards.
yeah,
And
Okay.
again, set the framework for what the upcoming budget season is gonna be like.
yeah.
Okay,
Because capital starts fairly early, right?
Yeah, and we had for a while a chairman's meeting of Capital FinCom Selectmen in October, November for
Okay.
that purpose. But I think it's better to have a full
Yes.
board.
Yeah, right.
and you didn't include CPC.
No, because it was just the budget stuff,
Right.
not CPC.
But they have a big impact on the budget. So, I mean.
No,
is
the
it-
tax, I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
But
I-
I think a larger meeting
is the tax.
makes sense.
Yes, and I also think as we go through the budget, I am going to, I've promised the schools that we would consolidate the select board and the finance committee meeting so that they're not doing the same presentation twice on different nights.
Fine.
Right,
So there will be one night for Minuteman and Ashoba to come in and present to both boards and say, this is, our presentation and move on. Because it's, to have, there's a lot of, especially with the regional school districts, there's a lot of nights that people have to commit. So
yes.
to do the same presentation, we'll try and consolidate those into one night.
Can I disturb 30 more seconds?
Yes, you may
Please
have 30 more.
further explain exactly what you mean by that budget meeting, just because that would be helpful for me to know what is going to be discussed in that, as I know.
So what it felt like was that, actually, it's interesting that the chairs of the committees used to meet, but our thought was that, we need to get everybody on the same page about the budget. So capital planning, this has been for years, capital planning is very organized, but in its own silo. And finance committee is over here, sort of in its own silo, except for that Jim represents both committees, I guess, to go to both. And then the select board seems to be the last one to know what the budget's happening. that's a little bit my editorial. But, so the idea is that we'd have that meeting and talk about, and then include CPC, because they're proposing really big things that could impact that whole, you know, the whole financing capital needs issue going down the road. So it seemed like it would be a good start to have everybody in the same room. I mean, that's my take on it.
No, I agree, and I think it's important. I mean, we could certainly do multiple all board budget meetings, but I think, you know, there should be one to kick off the budget season. You know, what we have for free cash, what we expect revenues to be like, what we expect the cost of living, so that capital says, you know, in my prior communities, it was, I would say to capital, this is the budget, go work with it. It's the opposite here. They say to me, here are the projects we approve, fund them. I think there needs to be more back and forth conversation before some of these things start. The finance committee should be hearing this. They should be weighing in on, yes, we want to take 50% of our free cash and put it directly to stabilization. That's the process we want to have. I think we should all be sitting around the table to have those conversations about our funding, our spending, our saving, before we even get started. And then, you know, there certainly could be another meeting. I mean, I personally think capital should be coming before the board to talk about the capital projects. I think CPC should be coming before the board. Those are sort of discussions that you all need to have as far as your leadership. I think there should be sort of, here's what we're recommending, and then engaging this board as the CEOs into, yes, we, you know, that's sort of the direction we thought, or what do you think about this coming down the road next year? Or how do you think that, you know, this vehicle, do you think it's going to last another year? I think those conversations should also take place.
Can I add one more committee to that? Planning board?
I think that's a separate.
So yeah, I'm just saying in terms of that meeting, you know, sitting on finance committee last year, you know, you're being asked to weigh in on a very detailed planning board, you know, discussion. And I don't know how to resolve that, because a lot of diligence is done by the planning board, you know, rightfully so. And then it comes to finance, and then you get, you know, asked that question. And this board obviously does the same of referring it. And as part of that fiduciary, like truly understanding the issue as much as we can, because we're not planning board experts to that extent. Some of us are. Like that seemed to be a gap in just sort of fundamental understanding of fiduciary knowledge that I had. And so I wanted to just hear what you all had to say as part of this coming together of boards as part of this town warrant, because that was the one where it was the most difficult to try to understand what they were trying to do.
Can I make a comment about this?
Yeah.
It feels to me like we're starting into our conversation about liaisons versus meeting with boards and committees more often. My feeling is, from what I'm hearing and from what I'm thinking myself, that it's like we should meet with boards and committees a couple of times a year.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we've got the sort of going into the budget, and then we've got the debunking or you know, either the crunch time before time or something, you know, there's more than once that we want to be able to check in.
Right.
And it feels to me like the idea of having a liaison was that somebody would go out and carry back that information. The fault is that any individual will do the best they can to hear what's being said in a separate meeting and report it back. And it's been translated through that individual's lens. Whereas if we meet as boards, then we can draw our own conclusions and have discussions about those separately later. And I just think it'd be really useful. I feel like it would make sense for us to try this other model and see if we can fit it with our meeting schedules.
I was gonna say, well, and I think that's the, you know, the idea of putting together this calendar is we could put down that, you know, the second meeting in September, you will always hear from the planning board. The third meeting or the second meeting in October, you'll meet with this, so that you set up your, whether it's quarterly, whether it's twice a year, maybe some committees you only need to see once a year. I think that is, you know, where you can sort of plug those committees in. I think to Zach's point with planning, quite frankly, I think the general bylaws need to change. I don't see why the finance committee is weighing in on non-financial articles, because I think that is well above their purview. I think that's another issue altogether. If there's a financial implication, absolutely, but planning board and changing bylaws.
It was difficult to read and vote on that.
That's been a perennial issue. I agree with you. The budgeting board, we may want to meet with them in October when the revenues are clear, the requests aren't, and maybe in late January when the requests are clear and it's, but planning board, there's always been this problem, and I've alluded to it, that come March or April, when you get your first draft of the warrant, you look at the back of it like, what? What's this stuff? And you just need that English explanation of
Yeah.
what is this all about?
Yeah.
And that, yeah, even with a charter change, that may alleviate the need for the FinCom to understand that stuff, but we still
Right, we
get
still
that
have
question.
to, right.
But maybe then your February, we do the financial state of the town, maybe the first meeting in February is always the planning board.
Mhm.
To check in on what articles are circulating around, or to have a conversation. I think, planning board may be one you want to hear from more than once a year.
Right.
Definitely.
But I think if we set a schedule that, they know that every 6 months, these are the meetings they're gonna have to, we have to work around them because they also meet on Tuesdays.
Right.
But if they know that these are the meetings they're gonna come before you and this is what we expect you to cover in February,
Mhm.
the potential warrant articles, I think it gives them some planning as well.
So maybe at our next meeting, we just do that piece of it, and talk about which committees we'd really like to meet with. We've talked about this sort of generally a few times, but, and start doing that, plug them into the calendar so that we can get the heads up. Speaking of which, we did have invited the Board of Health to join us
Yes.
next week to talk about the whole waste management issue.
Oh,
And-
great,
And
great.
not specifically, it was really about the bigger picture. What are they thinking in terms of is there other possibilities we can consider issues sort of?
And I have not heard back.
And you never heard back, and I was waiting to,
Yeah, they were possibly gonna schedule a meeting. Let me see if they did in fact schedule one.
I also put on my list another
They have a
discussion for us was that?
They have a meeting on Thursday, so.
Okay. Our role in the budget process, we should talk about where do we want to be involved? Where have we historically been? Where would we like to be involved in next year? Just to make sure that we're covering the bases that we feel like we should be meeting, so we can have that discussion at some point.
Okay.
I'll put it down. All right, so it's now 9:10, so okay, we're 10 minutes over. So the next steps are, we have all these notes.
Mhm.
We got a draft of a work plan for both of us and the town administrator. Now we need to start flushing it out. So I guess the question is, in terms of the SMART goals that we really need to start flushing out, are you ready to take that? We should be coming up with a little more detail on your proposed work plan.
Didn't you have another page where you consolidated?
I did.
I'm gonna take pictures of these, but I
can have.
I'll line my office with.
Well, I started at this point. Yeah, right.
I can certainly then put together some goals that would try to meet what we've talked about and what your overall work plan is, and then we can use that to discuss.
Okay.
If you all have specific goals, that's fine, but I think I can certainly take that and put some together. You all can, if you have something specific, and then we can discuss that to finalize it.
Okay.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is July and August, in theory, we should be able to devote a fair amount of time at our next 4 meetings to this kind of
Because
stuff.
theoretically it's quiet, is that what you're trying to tell me?
Theoretically.
Okay.
Except for the 27th, when we have 5 bike races coming before you. But yes.
Okay, all right, so that is the next steps that we will, and we do have a clear goal to have the work plan for Denise done before her second year starts, which is the beginning of September.
Yes, I signed my contract a year ago tomorrow.
Oh,
Wow.
Wow.
July 7th, I signed my contract here.
wow. Yeah, cheers to you.
Lucky us.
Yeah,
Yes.
I remember that day. I wasn't, up until the actual day, I wasn't.
You were
I was
worried?
afraid, she said, oh, I got her job.
All right, so I'm gonna change some things on the agenda. We're gonna add strategic planning with our ongoing items.
Yeah,
We'll add a recognition section while we work on a policy, and then I'll work on these other items.
and
Sorry, I was gonna say, is the recognition section also we recognize a person for winning an award? Kind of things like that
Yeah,
too,
Eagle
like
Scouts.
that, like the
Yeah.
Scouts did something or whatever,
Right.
and that would be an opportunity for us to sort of bring that to you and say, I'd like to talk
Yes.
about blah, blah, blah during that time, or is that?
Well, I would say, so Ellen has changed the agenda now says, I think it says board member comments instead of chair comments.
Oh,
Like
okay.
you could do that during,
Okay.
if you wanted to acknowledge someone.
Okay,
I think the recognition section would be a folks.
More of somebody who
residents
had
say, we want to put
reached out
this,
to us.
we'd like to recognize
Got it.
X.
Because usually when we have like Eagle Scouts, we've actually asked them to come.
Yeah.
Right, we would give them a
Yeah,
certificate.
that is, they've been reluctant to do that, because it used to be a lot of fun.
Huh.
I don't know why that has dropped off. It wasn't arguing, I didn't think.
Okay. You're gonna kiss them off.
I don't think so.
Can I circle back for one
Yes.
second to that whole conversation we had about sort of prior to coming up with the recommendations?
Yeah.
If we were talking about having a certain number of people that were all jazzed about something, and getting 20 signatures or this and that and the other. I think if it felt like that was happening, that would be the moment to invite that group to our meeting.
Mhm.
To visit and to, raise public awareness by being part of our meeting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
without,
mean, I like that
without a addition or signatures or anything, but just, if there seems to be that level of interest, then it's clearly.
Well, even the little discussion, like the recent one with the autism, and I think anytime, because there's always gonna be someone listening who really doesn't know anything about it, or why are we doing it, and,
Right.
so. And you're saying like bike safety, it never hurts to remind people, what's that line on the road mean? Right? I mean, that's,
What are they called?
Why do we wear helmets?
The Sharrows.
Sharrows.
Sharrows. What Sharrows?
that's what it's called.
The little stencils of a bike.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sharrows.
Sharrows, like share, arrows, because they do point the
Oh,
direction of travel,
share.
but share the road.
Got it. All right.
They are,
See, we're already on.
I know, we learned something.
This is
I
what I
can't wait for the bike
they
race.
are a significant step down from a
Line.
designated bike path.
Yeah. I love the ones where the parking's on the side next to the bike lanes.
I love the ones where you see them in the middle of the road. It's like, really? You want me out there?
I do love the ones where it all of a sudden says, bike lane ends.
Yeah, it's true.
That was on a
Okay,
cycle,
so any last thoughts?
Thank you.
Yeah, This is a great
Thank you.
meeting, yeah.
I consider that on time. Nice job.
Yep, perfect. Do you have
The
to make a
owl
motion to
was not
adjourn?
that distracting.
And the owl, we don't
And
know.
it looks really
It
good.
was creepy.
Does it?
Does it really?
It was creepy every once in a while. I looked at it, it's just,
No,
I'm glad I didn't have my camera.
no, it looks really, I bet we'll get a lot of positive feedback for the new
Yes.
camera.
Oh,
It looks
great.
really good.
All right, do
Perfect.
we need to actually motion to adjourn?
yeah. I think-
Okay.
So-
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right,
All right.
so once we're off, go.